Welcome to the SW7 Academy podcast with myself, Sam Warburton, and head coach Chris Toombs, and we will teach you about all the elite behaviours and training methods that you need to know to build you into the best possible athlete. Just a quick word about our sponsors, Tramshed Tech. Tramshed Tech is a collaborative community where startups scale up, a platform for growth supporting the tech, digital and creative industries. Like SW7, it's a community made up of high performers where having a growth mindset is key. Tramshed Tech can help you on your journey whether your business needs space to work, skills training or business support services. Their award-winning Startup Academy is open for registration for pre-start or early stage businesses. Tramshed Tech are currently expanding to new locations in Wales including Cardiff, Newport, Barry and Swansea. So if you're an entrepreneur looking for space to work, business support or skills training, head to tramshedtech.co.uk or at tramshedtech on social media to find out more. Okay, so this episode, in our 35 years combined at elite level professional sport, we're going to talk about the freakiest or most professional pros and characters as well that we've come across. So I think there'll be an underlying message through all this, which you'll get at the end of the episode. But let's discuss these freaky athletes, top pros, and I think you've got a good one to kick us off, haven't you? Why don't we dive into him first?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, this is exciting. I'll only reference rugby. I think that's the most contextual stuff. I've done a bit of cricket as well, and trust me, there's some absolute characters in that sport. But I think the first rugby player, which may surprise people from a professional standards level, Gavin Henson.
Yeah,
he was one of the most professional and diligent players I've ever worked with, and I think that might surprise a few people because I know that he's had a little bit of controversy in his life. I think he owns a pub now, which is pretty ironic. But I always knew that he always had a challenge when it came to alcohol, and that's something that we obviously don't need to delve into. But from a professional habit standpoint, Gavin was an exceptionally diligent player, and I really, it wasn't a massive amount of time that I spent training in and around, but he came to the Cardiff Blues. And I was just amazed at how well he prepared, getting to training, a bit like yourself, almost first in, one of the last out, really conscious of nutrition, but not just from a vanity standpoint, because I know there was definitely an element of that, but it was also the fueling side. I mean, I remember him going to away trips with the Tupperware containers so he could look after and manage his nutrients and his nutritional intake. I thought that was exceptionally professional. Unfortunately, like we said, when he's had a couple of beers, he tends to get a little bit loose. But that's for someone else to judge, and I don't judge him because from a professional standpoint, I thought he was exceptional.
I can add to that. I remember we were flying out to Poland for a World Cup pre-season camp, and we got to a hotel outside Heathrow because we were flying early the next morning. And I looked at the room list, and bear in mind, I'm like 22 now, and I grew up watching Gavin Henson kicking, Grand Slam winning kicks and that. And he was probably the first. Probably like Gareth Edwards is obviously the greatest of all time, but like talking of modern day poster boys, he was probably the biggest poster boy that Wales had in that period of time.
100%.
I remember I was rooming with him. I thought, oh my god, I'm rooming with Gavin Henson. And I was like young and a bit like, oh, I wonder what he's like. I bet he might. I didn't know what he was going to talk about. I remember going home and telling my wife that I roomed with him. She's like, oh, what's he like? And I was like, he's one of the nicest, most down to earth, but like you say, more importantly, professional guys I've ever worked with. And when he was at the Blues, like you said, I remember the Tupperware boxes with weighed out chicken and couscous and greens. I was like, I couldn't believe how good a pro he was. And he was actually a great recruit for Cardiff because the younger guys see, that's what, and he was a Lions tourist and Grand Slam winner, like, that's what it takes. So yeah, Gavin Henson was an exceptional pro. Might surprise people, but exceptional pro.
No, absolutely. And I think going back, all those 35 years combined, I think some of the guys that I first got exposed to at Leicester Tigers were really fantastic pros as well. But I think the underlying theme, without wanting to try and spoil it, relatively early on in the episode, I think when you look at the traits of the good pros, there's no surprise that those good pros have had 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100 test caps. You think, I'll just give you... World Cup winners, Lions tourists, multiple Lions tourists, championship winners, exactly. And I know you've got a few names alongside the guys that I've kind of had exposure to in my career. But, Austin Healey, I know again from his punditry and also, the kind of press attention he gained when he was a player, a bit cheeky, a bit cocky and all this sort of stuff. He was the first person, actually, ironically, he was the first person who I exposed myself around VBT with.
Oh, really?
Because when he was injured, he had an Achilles issue for a long, long time at the back end of his career. And he was literally trying to get, let's look at the time. He was trying to get to the Rugby World Cup. I'm sure it was 2003. I know he didn't end up making it. But he was desperate to get fit for the Rugby World Cup selection. And he worked exceptionally hard on his rehab, his prehab, strength and power development, exceptionally fast. I mean, played wing, played fly half, played 9. I mean, he would be the first person to tell you that obviously they won the Heineken Cup against Munster in Cardiff.
And he got man of the match.
He was man of the match. Oh yeah, he'd absolutely tell you. He was actually, in fairness, so again, it's about knowing people on the field. I know you're going to probably talk about Faz at some point. I don't know why I call him Faz. I don't know the bloke, but I know he goes by Faz. About people's perception of Owen Farrell. And if you know the guy and you know him off the field, and I was fortunate enough to meet him a few times off the field in Seattle, ironically, but really nice. I mean, I call it the white line fever. Step over the white line a bit, and I know you're going to probably mention, I'm stealing your thunder here, you're probably going to mention Johnny Sexton as a good pro as well. On the field, as an opposition, you probably think, bit of a dick, but delivers.
Amazing.
And that's the same. Austin off the field, he might be a bit mouthy, he might be a bit cocky, but the underlying mechanism or the underlying messaging here in this particular episode of our pod, unbelievable pro.
Do you know, and people talk about his punditry, I think he's an exceptional pundit. I think he's a brilliant... Somebody said to me, who's the best commentator you've worked with since you finished? Like, Austin Healey's one of the best commentators, because obviously his preparation that he used as a player has translated into punditry. I think he's an exceptional pundit, and I was staying away in London for a night. We were doing, I think we did the Champions Cup final together, going back in 2021 or something. Got up early to go to the gym, day of the game, and he was in there training. It was nice because you sort of laugh because you're retired old boys now, but old habits die hard, and they translate into new careers.
Austin as a player would definitely be one of those who'd say, oh yeah, I do as little training as possible, but would definitely have a watt bike at home and do some sprints on the side. And he was exceptional. And I mean, I know we're going to tell you, or hopefully I'll tell you a story, but Ben Kay, Leicester Tiger, again, pundit, transferring the skills and the qualities they had as a player into their commentary careers. And I know other people in business will be just as successful who've not come into the sort of sport as a pundit, but
they're good in their careers because of those traits.
Lewis Moody spent a lot of time rehabbing and injured because of the way he played the game, as you and I both know. Another one, exceptionally diligent when it came to preparing to play. I could the list. I mean, no, it's about time you had it. It's about time you mentioned a couple. But those are my Tigers days. But I've got a story to tell you about the Tigers, lads, which will be interesting for the listeners.
No, tell me now. But while we're on the subject of Austin Healey, I remember walking into the gym and I was lifting some good tin. I was still trying to shift some tin. I remember he was like, "Oh, that's good weight, that," because I was doing some squat stuff. He was like, You don't train your calves, though, do you?
This is the thing about Oz.
And he's got good calves. I was like,
he has got good calves. I remember that. But this sums him up, doesn't it?
Yeah,
There's always, he's giving you a backhanded compliment, but he's also giving you
just
a cocky little quip at the end of the day as well.
I
know, but I'm sure when you played it. Did you ever play against him?
No, we would have just missed each other. I sort of started in 80, probably finished in mid noughties, probably.
Yeah. So. No, I remember Cardiff Blues. I know it's Cardiff Rugby. I remember Cardiff playing against Leicester up in Welford Road in the pre-season. He was kind of still back end of his career, like early 2000s.
Yeah.
God, he was cocky, but God, he was good.
But he could back it up.
And this is the thing. I think he played against Bomber? Lee Thomas.
Oh, yeah.
And obviously, athletically, Lee was not quite in the same shape as Austin. He rinsed him for the whole game, but with funny banter. I can't recollect all of it, but exactly right. He was a cocky little, but he was an exceptionally good pro.
He was a good athlete, good pro.
No, I mean,
so
I was
very
the Leicester story. So at the time they had some fairly decent players. Martin Johnson, you've probably heard of. So Jono, Ben Kay, Lewis Deacon, who ended up playing for England, and Jim Hamilton, who was a young player, ended up playing for Scotland. He wasn't at the time a Scottish international, but he was an up and coming player. So all of them second rows.
It's a good crew of second rows.
So the engine room, I would say it's a top up type session. Every probably 2 or 3 weeks maybe they'd do this rowing chat. They loved the off feet conditioning. They would row, and they're obviously all 6'6", 6'7", that sort of height. They'd do 1 minute on, 1 minute off, competitive for 12 or 10 to 12 reps, and I think the goal was a minimum was 330 meters per minute with a minute recovery, and then go again for 10 reps.
Wow.
And obviously they're competitive animals. I do think one session that I watched them complete, and bearing in mind it's only a quick top up, it's 10 minutes on and 10 minutes off, so 20-minute session just to have a blowout. I'm sure, and I wish I'd kept better records because it was paper and pencil back then, I'm sure all 4 hit 350 meters or more for all 10 reps, 1 on, 1 off. And I reckon anyone out there who wants to try that challenge, 1 minute on, 1 minute off with 350 meters of output they were fit boys.
Yeah.
But that's where they didn't want to do sort of running top ups as the big heavies. So they would do a 1 on, 1 off for 10. That was, and the competitiveness around that group was great.
That
and
environment's
the banter.
great.
But yeah, Jim Hamilton, 6'7", 19 years old, going up against Martin Johnson, World Cup winner. But the work ethic and the sort of engine room was phenomenal. It's a great little story.
I love that.
But try, if you're a second row wanting to kind of aspire to really, really unbelievable levels of quite high aerobic fitness, 350 meters for 10 reps in a row with only 1 minute recovery is engine room. Yeah. But that was so there's 3 or 4 other top boys as well.
Yeah, Andy Powell.
Oh,
so people might not expect
he's
him
a freak
to,
athlete. Freak athlete.
What an athlete!
Yeah.
Listen, he'll always be forever remembered for his golf buggy incident, but as an athlete, and in 08 he was exceptional, and then 09 went on the Lions tour. But I think people underestimate how good an athlete, and you would have coached him.
Yes.
Have you got any nuggets on him?
Mate, great.
I'm sure you. I know you have.
Great personality. Powell was just he was perfect for me as a coach at the time because I, as you know, bias speed, strength, and power. I mean, I think him at Newport. Forget about. He actually was at Leicester Tigers with me as well.
Was he really?
He came to. I mean, I've got some funny stories to tell about him. I mean, you can imagine in Leicester Tigers days. We'll get onto him as an athlete in a minute, but he was in what I would consider sort of the second string. Bearing in mind you had Neil Back, Martin Corrie, phenomenal back row. I can't remember who the 8 was. But Josh Kronfeld as a 7, he comes into our kind of high level of work. Anyway, there was a shit ton of really quality players, and I remember there was a line-out session, and Powell was kind of waiting impatiently for his turn to sort of swap in. And I think at the time it was Martin Corrie who went to the World Cup. I'm sure Powell just was trying to push in to the point where it was kind of like, Powell, mate, it's like almost the first 15 are practicing for getting their stuff right for the weekend, and it's like, you're a squad player, you're kind of not playing this week. But he was desperate to get. I mean, I think it almost ended up in a fight where he's kind of just basically pushing into the back of the line out to get his reps. But it's like, mate, you're not getting any reps today.
It's a
starting team, like get out. But he was just a character on that front. But I mean, there's not many people who would be in their pomp. I mean, he went to the Lions in 2009, but I think, like you say, the 2008 year, he was electric, wasn't he?
Amazing,
scoring tries, smashing people, bumping them off. I mean, I don't think he was a bit like Rushy, and we'll talk about Rushy, the Kiwi number 8 a bit later on. But they had an appetite to carry, but ultimately, as we both know, they didn't hit any rucks and they didn't do much tackling. They were the kind of glory boy carriers, which is fine because they had an appetite to carry repetitively. But I mean, Powell in his pomp, 115 kgs, 7 or 8% body fat,
crazy,
incredibly explosive,
footwork,
pretty robust as well in terms of resiliency. Yeah. There are others like I mean, I've got a list of freaky athletes, Henry Tuolagi being one of them. I mean, we'll talk about freakies maybe later. But while we're on the subject, like Henry Tuolagi always was getting injured because he's almost like that thoroughbred with such fast 125, 130 kilo man who would never ever slow down for contact. He is, I'm going to run you over, speed bumps everywhere. Yeah, I mean, he was crazy. Henry was one of the freakiest athletes ever.
Without doubt.
But Powell was right up there because, like you say, he had the gas of an outside back. But he was 115 kgs, and I know Jamie Roberts, and I know he'll come into this conversation as well. Jamie ended up playing centre at 115 kgs and probably about 8-9% body fat as well. So the freaky athlete became, without being funny, that freaky athletes were almost the norm, and they still are in some respects because we've got that. You think about you do a lot of punditry. You analyse the top 14 guys. They're huge. These outside backs now are 110.
Some
and
of the
fast.
Polynesian boys.
Yeah,
crazy.
well, yeah, absolutely.
On Powell, and we mentioned Rushy, probably a segue into Rushy, but I remember he said a story about Andy Powell, and he said they went out for food with Cardiff, and they went for pizza. And the true story, he goes, they sat down, and Powell ordered his pizza, and the waitress said, "Oh, would you like that in 4 slices or 8 slices?" And he goes, "Oh, I'll have to have 4. I couldn't eat 8." He's not the brightest spark, but he's brilliant value.
Amazing value.
On Rushy, I thought he was great there was a time when he was playing at Cardiff, I thought he was one of the best 8s in the world. It was touted he was going to get back into the New Zealand squad, even though he was playing out in Cardiff. But he was unbelievable in those sort of late noughties years. And just little things like, I remember somebody left their dumbbells on the floor in the gym, and he had a proper go at them leaving. And you always said a clean gym is a safe gym. You always say that to us. I remember growing up. But like, he's like, put your weights back. What are you doing? This is like, you elite level environment. You don't just put your dumbbells out and you leave them. Tidy up the gym after you, mate. And like, you call out the younger boys, but it's just all this non-stop standard setting. And we'd be doing like a contact session. And you know what a lot of players are like? They're like, look at each other and say, I'm going to go left. I'm going to go to your right. So they know which way, if you're doing one-on-one tackling, for example. And you can see that boys have got gentlemen's agreements. But I remember Rushy, Xavier Rush, excuse me for calling him Rushy, he ran into someone. He thought, the guy tackling him thought he had a gentleman's with him. And he just absolutely T-boned him and ran straight over him. He's like, F&L, mate, what are you doing? He's like, this is contact training, pal. We're doing contact, so strap up, And I remember everyone sort of sharpened the shoulders and like, oh, right, Ed's on. But you need people in that environment. And you're only doing it for 5 minutes, You're not like smashed to it for an hour. It's a 5-minute drill, mate. Just focus for 5 minutes and let's get some work out of it. But when like those little things are happening non-stop throughout the day, that's where culture and standards come in. When you've got 5 guys who are doing that in little ways like that, multiple times throughout the day, throughout the week, throughout the month, that's when you get a good team culture of, training first, elite behaviours, habits. And that's why they're only like tiny little nuggets. Yeah. But that happened non-stop, and that's why it was a good environment back then.
Rushy was phenomenal for my learning as a coach as well, because at one point in time, I think we've gone on record as saying this before, he prepared differently to other people, but week in, week out, he was ready for the weekend. And he was the guy who really got me into like the heavy sled towing, the prowlers, sled drags, looking after. He did, and take this as his men, he looked after himself, but by looking after himself really well, he showed up week in, week out. And like you say, I absolutely think he was one of Cardiff's best ever overseas players, if not one of Cardiff's best ever players.
I think so.
Forget about his nationality. I mean, phenomenal. I mean, I remember the Wasps game before when Cardiff were going really well. Wasps away in the pouring rain. I think he carried 20, 25 times. It was a Heineken Cup semi-final. Oh no, it was the year we went to Toulon and played in the Amlin.
Oh, 10.
It was a semi-final. Everyone was giving, English teams are better than the Welsh team, blah, 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 all that usual stuff. But his appetite to carry, he didn't have an appetite to hit rucks or tackle, but his appetite to carry was absolutely phenomenal. But also, as we both know, he's a character as well. And I quite liked it, because I did look recently, believe it or not, at the old photos of Cardiff doing well in the Amlin and the EDF, when we obviously gave Gloucester a nice little hiding at Twickenham, which was very satisfying, as we both know.
50 pointer.
But I remember there was a changing room photo after the game, and talking of guys who like, amazing work ethics and fun to be around. You had Rushy with his top off, full 6-pack. I think the only other guy with his top off was Alfie, Gareth Thomas.
You've got to say 6-pack at probably 115 kilo as well.
Exactly. Yeah. But Rushy was vain, but also had performance at the heart. A bit like some of the other conversations we've had about performance. If you've got Gavin Henson, another one, perfect. We started at the front end of the show. Lean, he was vain, absolutely. He'll hold his hand up and say, but vanity from a gym perspective, guys want to be there. And we get onto Bradley Davis in a minute, who wasn't that vain, but loved doing curls in the squat rack, which was one of my pet hates. But I actually, because of the character of the guy and the work ethic of the guy, he almost did it to wind me up. He wanted to do bicep curls at the end of every session, no matter what. There's another guy, which I haven't even mentioned. We haven't even got to sort of my latter years with like, the gun club at Seattle Seawolves, where Nakai Penny, who's an unbelievably fast twitch animal, kind of similar sort of shape to you, loved doing bicep curls at the end of a weight session. Like, it was almost like
the
weight session. Yeah. Oh, exactly. Sign off. Weight session hasn't finished unless you've done your guns at the end. And by the time they'd done what I considered the sort of meat and potatoes, mate, just crack on and do your buys. As long as you're not there for another half hour doing bicep curls, just like you say, sign off with your biceps. Bradley Davis would do it.
It makes them feel good.
Brad Tucker would do it. These guys from the US program would do it. But I mean, the Vanity boys, like the other one, Alfie Thomas. What a work ethic!
Amazing.
But again, we've talked about this in previous shows. This elite behaviours piece. Look at the traits of these people. All Blacks, Welsh internationals. Alfie, I think, was the first Welsh player to hit 100 caps. Played at Toulouse, won the Heineken Cup.
Captain the Lions.
There's no surprise that the guys with work ethic and talent put those two things together. We haven't even got to the Gethin Jenkins of this world. I think we've mentioned him on previous episodes, whereby he's doing his calf rehab to stay healthy. I know he had calf problems in, Reece Patchell, who's just about to come in. He's had some terrible, unfortunately, injury issues with hammies and stuff recently. But diligence, work ethic, professional habits, phenomenal athletes to emulate. If you're a young player going into the Scarlets now, you've got Lee Halfpenny with him now. I mean, boring story for you, but I went to the gym early at the weekend just to get my own little, training session done. 7:30 last Saturday. John Foxey's there. John Davis is at the gym well. in his off season. 7:30 Saturday morning, getting the work done. 100 test caps. Played all over the world. 3 Lions tours.
Played the Lions series twice. Once.
There's some underlying, lessons to be learned for young players here. That those with the habits and the work ethic, and obviously the talent and ability, are making the absolute most out of their careers by looking after their bodies. I know we talked about this when you first started playing. Look after your body, and rugby and everything else will look after itself. It's one of those ones where your physical qualities, I know you need the tactical and technical and the psychological playing abilities, of course, but your body is your business.
Yeah.
And you've got to look after it, because it's going to, otherwise it'll let you down. And we both know there could be a ton of players we talk about who were one season wonders because they didn't get the work done. We're talking about people who consistently, week in, week out, a bit like, I know in different sport, the Federers of this world, the Nadals, they're doing the little things day in, day out. It's a bit like going back to that previous episode we've done, whereby they're happy doing the fundamentals week in, week out, month in, month out, year in, year out, like we've talked about in the past. Just getting the work done and doing the work that basically other players aren't prepared to do. I think that's a crucial element.
On Foxy, I remember on the Lions tour in 2013, and because he's strapped up and he's got a head guard and he's got loads of strapping on his legs and his arms and that, you can't really, but everyone knows he's got that hand off, And I remember we went for a pool recovery session really early on, obviously, and he was obviously top off. And I remember he is so freaky. I knew because he was one of the freakiest guys to come through in Wales probably over the last 15 years athletically. And he had his top off. I remember the England boys who'd never seen him top off before. I remember I was eavesdropping. I heard them go, "Oh my God, have you seen John?" Like he does look. He looks like a bodybuilder almost. He's crazy. But I remember I finished my training day with Wales. I walk into the gym and this indoor centre we've got at the back of the car park. I'm like, I'm going to do my shoulder pre-op. Going to be a really good pro. No one else is there after cryotherapy, and Anna Wynne Jones would be in there. George North was doing his hamstring work. John Davis was doing his groin. He had a lot of groin and adductor issues. Lee Halfpenny was in there. I was like, wow, like this is what the top athletes do.
There's a who's who of 100 cap international players.
Right, and there's no coincidence.
No,
that's just the way it is. But so you mentioned Lee Halfpenny and Gethin Jenkins, two great pros, both still not Gethin's coaching at top level, but played until he was 37. We've got great longevity. Lee Halfpenny still going 100 capper. I remember I finished a training day at Cardiff, and Lee was having some work treatment done. No surprise, he's been a good pro, looking after his body on the massage bed, seeing the physios. And I was in the rehab corner. Remember the corner of the gym, which is kind of set up with the soft mats, and it was rehab. So at the end of the day, and I preach this a bit on Instagram, I used to do my mobility. So I do a hip mobility for 10-15 minutes at the end of almost every day's training. And it was vital for me for contact prep anyway. So I used to see it as recovery, and it was good for just my general body position and contact. So I'd always do 15 minutes of mobility at the end of the day. Gethin Jenkins was there as well, doing some with me just by chance. And, well, not by chance, he's top pro, but, the boys are there doing their extras that they need to do. Lee Halfpenny walks out the gym in his jeans and T-shirt. He obviously, showered up. He was going in to have some shoulder work done so we could just relax in his civvies and have some treatment. But I remember he did a double take at me and Gethin because he obviously was walking back to his bag thinking he was the only guy left to train. And he saw me and Gethin. So he saw us, carried on walking. I haven't even spoken to him about this story. I don't know if he even remembers. He saw us, sort of like did a double take, and then walked over to the minivans and in his jeans started doing rehab. So me and Gethin looked at each other. We were like, I remember whispering to Gethin going, mate, let's stay here and let's see how long he does prehab for in his jeans. So we were there for like another quarter of an hour, which doesn't sound long, but like, 25 minutes down mobility at the end of the day, and I've got my wife at home. I'm like, I have got a life to get back to. After a quarter of an hour, I said to Gethin, like, I'm going to have to go. Lee was still there, but he just could not leave the training ground knowing that we were still there doing extras. But it was
awesome.
But I love it didn't need to be done. He's a superb pro. He'd probably been kicking for 45 minutes already before that, and then his contrast hot baths. I remember I finished a training day, we used to have the ice bath, and there was a hot bath. We'd always do contrast baths, and I'd be in there, then Lee would walk in, or vice versa. Like we were always there at the end of the day together, not trying to compete, but just like we were driving the professional habits together.
Getting the work done. Yeah.
But like it was just a great example of just his mindset though, and how he couldn't let us go out. It was so funny. And me and Gethin give up, and he walked out. We're like, Lee, bollocks this, we're going. Like I can't stay longer than you. But great pro.
But some unbelievable characters as well. I mean, there are so many. I mean, like I say, I had to think about some of the players that also influenced me from a coaching standpoint as well. I always remember Jason Spice, fabulous player, underrated actually. Obviously came from New Zealand as well. Hated the gym, but you just had to get into. He'd love running repeats. He'd love intervals. You just had to basically try to get. He'd have a work ethic for that, but trying to get him to do anything in the gym was real. It's a challenge, but in a good way. Looking back, you think actually same with Fish, Paul Tito. They had their strengths. He had a push press. That was all he was good at in the gym. But he'd run all day. Jason would run all day. He'd do his sled towing. He'd do his speed work, his acceleration stuff as a 9. But you ask him to run, 10 50s with 20 seconds recovery, he would eat that up for fun. He had his work ethic and his own preparatory kind of matrix that he wanted to get done. But yeah, going into the gym was like a real, for some of the lads, real challenge. But
I'll add to Jason Spice, but like just like from a high standards point of view, it's like in training, you might have, no disrespect to club size, some boys might go out on their club teams for an hour and a half, and of that, when you actually think about it, it's probably like an hour of chat time, half-hour training time. But when we had 45 minutes of training, you might have, if you got one starter play, you might have 1 or 2 chances to do that starter play. Otherwise, you've got to move on because you've got to do the session. It was so high intensity and intense, wasn't it? I remember Jason Spice, like he was I love the standards he demanded. Like, we got like 1 rep to get this starter move on this Thursday before a team run on Saturday. I think it might have even been Bradley Davis who gave him the ball off the top of the line out, and the delivery wasn't good. And like it was the only chance we had. I remember he got the ball and he just hoofed it to the side of the field. He's like, I can't deal with that shit, and because it was a poor delivery. And then the coaches were like, Jace, that's our one shot. We got to move on now. But he's like, I'm not having that. You've got to give me better delivery. But like,
he was another one. He demanded high standards.
But like that little thing added on to what Rushy used to be like, added on to what Lee used to be like, and Gethin used to be like. That's why at that moment in time it was a high achieving environment, because that was just what people demanded. I just thought I'd add that.
No,
they're just little nuggets.
No, absolutely agree. That spine, I mean, that was the thing that I loved about those years as well. That spine, and we'll get into a freaky athlete in a minute.
Yeah, we'll do that next.
A really freaky athlete who's part of that spine. But the spine of the team when those good years, for what I call the good years, 2007, 2010, not that I want to live in the past, but you had 5 overseas players who were class. You had 5 or 6 young up-and-coming Welsh players who ended up being, Lions and multiple Lions, and, yourself, Jamie, Lee Halfpenny, the list can go on, Bradley Davis.
Bradley's the best athlete, not the best second row not to play for the Lions. He just got injuries at the wrong time.
I totally agree. Yeah. I mean, it is. I mean, Brad still really, I mean, going back to work ethics, Brad really impressed me a couple of years ago, just before I went back to Seattle. He was at USW, University of South Wales. And he was, again, another one like John Fox, off-season, written his own programming, which actually made sense, because for all Brad's joking around, Brad had absorbed what was good with all the S&C coaches. He was at Wasps, he'd been at Ospreys, he'd been at Lions, with Cardiff, Wales, all those. He had written his off-season programming to do in his own time, when nobody else was watching, at University of South Wales, just going about his business. Another one, 60 plus test caps, still playing, 250, 300 first team games for Premiership level players.
Great player.
I mean, phenomenal players. But I mean, the spine of that team was awesome overseas players and young Welsh talent. And obviously you had your Gethins, you had Martin Williams going up against you, for example. But the freak athletes in that particular moment were Powell Felice. Remember, 75-year-old Powell, who still claims he's 29.
75. The boys used to, I remember the Polynesian boys, they called it the Cuzzy Corner in the changing room.
Yeah, well,
they'd all sit together. And because he was 38 or whatever, he was still finishing, still the strongest guy in the gym. They called him Fossil, not because of foul, but for fossil, because he was so old. But he would still, I remember there was a boy, you won't mind me saying his name, Macaulay Cook in the hex bar deadlift, banging up like a 240, 250, boys high-fiving him. And Powell walked over, just picked it up and started laughing. And that is nothing for him. Crazy.
I have a load of examples. I love my velocity-based training. Powell would not infuriate me. I was in awe about the physical. I mean, we had the Kaiser squat, which everyone kind of competed against. I know you're a decent sort of 5,000 plus. And for those who know the Kaiser squat, 4 to 4,500 is pretty good. I think you were in the 5,000 club. Josh Navidi was. I can name a few names. I've got the list of people in my head. Yeah. But Powell was in the 6,000 club. There was only 2 people who hit 6,000. He was one of them. But
didn't you tell that to the Kaiser guy? And they said they haven't seen.
No, I mean, incredible.
Yeah.
Even when they were talking about NFL athletes in America, they seen Powell, going back to your point about the 250 hex bar. I remember we never really prescribed load to him, but I used my velocity-based training stuff. And I knew, because I understood velocity-based training and fatigue and stimulus, I knew that he was lifting sub-maximal loads, because I knew by the speed at which he moved the bar. But I've got a video of it actually from my records in the Blues. Off a low block, we're talking about a 6-inch block. We didn't have high handle trap bars at the time. We just had normal. So it's the equivalent of a high handle trap bar in this day and age. This is going back 15 years. He claimed he was only 29 then, but I think he was 40 then. But that's another story about passports. But it was 270 on the bar. I remember it. He was 270 on the bar, and he moved it at 0.9 meters per second. And a bit like you've just suggested with the Macaulay Cook example. 270 at 0.9, I think. He was laughing. That would probably come out at 350.
Yeah.
And it was the grin and the laugh, as if to say, "You idiot, I'm just warming up." He never ever.
White boys. I think they used to take the mick. They'd be like, "Come on, lads."
He was. I mean, there's a lot of props now. I mean, I love the guy from Bristol, Max Lahif, is it?
Yeah,
he's just hilarious, but also in incredible
he's
shape.
Got to be a good pro.
Incredible shape. But I just think the personality of that bloke's hilarious. But anyway, Powell, I wouldn't say it. No, I think at one point he did hit 10% body fat, so he's lean. He lost in one game 10 kgs of fluids.
What?
No, I remember one of the hot days in France. We weighed him pre and post, and he had lost 10 kgs. And when he took his shirt. I mean, this is taking his shirt weighed 5 kgs. His socks weighed 1 kilo each. Yeah. There's sweat everywhere. I mean, he was 125 kilos of muscle.
Yeah.
And he was like a furnace.
Abs. He had abs at 125 kilos.
He had abs. I mean, I remember a game against Toulouse, and I remember a game against Leicester Tigers where he was just running people over. Yeah. And he was like a truck.
I'll Google him. If you're a youngster, please Google it.
Powell Felice, F-A-O-F-I-L-I-S-E. Powell Felice, 75 years old, absolute truck, still playing rugby. But he was like that, what I call the silent assassin. He'd look at you, he'd smile at you, and then he'd want to run you over.
Yeah,
he was that Tongan. I mean, him and Mama Molatiku, he's about 45, 50 now.
Still great shape as well.
Ripped. I saw him recently. Yeah. He lives in Barry. Ripped.
Yeah.
Great pro.
Amazing.
In personal training business now, which is I'm pleased for him, and he obviously does a bit of coaching as well. But those two, they were part of this kind of overseas. I wouldn't say they were freaky athletes.
They were freaky for Polynesian standards.
They were, but because they were so lean as well.
Yeah.
We both know some of them. Casey Lalala comes into this freaky athlete, not because he was exceptional going forward, but I actually think Casey's sideways movement, I called him snake hips.
Crazy.
In confined spaces, I did watch some of the Toulon. I can't remember why I watched it, but I watched it back quite recently, the final. Yeah. And I remember Casey at one point, literally in about a meter square, beat 3 players, and none of them laid a hand on him.
Yeah,
and I was
crazy.
like, this guy's sideways movement, lateral movement was phenomenal. But it goes back to the hex bar deadlift kind of experience. He could jump with about 150. He had incredibly strong hips. And he could move sideways.
Was he Samoan descent?
Samoan.
Samoan.
Yeah. He only played twice for New Zealand. He was another phenomenal signing for the Blues. But I mean, mate, we could talk about phenomenal players, freaky athletes, for days on end. We got so many cool stories about those characters. But I think we have to finish. We have to finish on the lazy bastards. I think as a strength and conditioning coach. This was one of them. It shapes you as a coach.
Sorry, I'm going to jump in. I remember a funny thing you did. I won't say his name to spare his blushes, but I remember he finished with Cardiff. And we all signed the jersey like, oh, thanks, it's Chris, just because you're here. Say it's thanks, Chris. Love your time here, Sam. Do you know what I mean? Whatever. We all signed this Cardiff jersey for him. And I remember you signed it off. You said, to so-and-so, the worst genetics I have ever worked with in my career, Chris Toombs. But you got some shocking.
I know. But do you know what? That particular player, like you say, I do know who it is. He's now also got he's had a phenomenal coaching career. Phenomenal player.
He is.
Yes, yeah, you know. We can't name him, which is a shame. But phenomenal coaching career. So in Wales, great bloke, great bloke.
Yeah, very good guy.
He didn't have great genetics, but great work ethic again, rugby understanding. He got the best out of himself. Rugby understanding was phenomenal. But yeah, we won't.
So he's not lazy, but I just thought that was funny.
The lazy bastards.
Does that kill you when you see someone who's got such good genetic potential? Because it's the first thing I ask when I see a young player. I might have mentioned this. You see a good, talented young player, and like I don't care if he's 6'6" and ripped to the bone. And the first thing I'll say if I'm chatting to an academy manager, go, well, what's he like though?
Yes,
because
otherwise
he's not going to get anywhere.
As a coach, of course, you want to work with like people who've got a great work ethic, but also what kind of challenged me and almost excited me in the latter end of my career, and talk about freaky athletes, and we can go. Robin Copeland.
Oh yeah,
great work ethic, very fast, explosive. 6'8", played for Ireland in the end, which I was pleased about. But he was a challenge because he loved playing, but gym wasn't necessarily gym wasn't the habitat that people liked in some cases. And this is going back.
Hate the gym, innit?
But some players love playing. Yeah. So these two, I will name them, but they had great careers. In fairness, I mean, one was a British and Irish Lion twice, maybe. Unbelievable skills. Darren Morris.
Yeah.
So I worked with Darren, and sorry, Darren, I know you. I know where you are. We talk every now and again, and believe it or not, but Darren was a phenomenal player. British Lion, played for. So he was at Leicester Tigers when I was there, and he also then came to Cardiff when I was at Cardiff as well. So two of my pro teams. Darren Morris. What I loved was Darren always had a left knee injury and a right elbow injury. So you almost think
self-diagnosed.
He's worked. Yeah, of course. He's worked it out that if he's got an opposite side, so right knee or left elbow, he can basically do next to nothing. So that was what challenged us as coaches to problem solve. And a friend of mine who works in action sports was always focusing on what they can do, not what they can't do. So if you've got an elbow injury and a right knee, so this guy ended up doing single arm work and single leg work all the time, because otherwise he thought, if I've got an elbow or a shoulder and I've got a knee, I'm free. I'm free to do nothing. Just get treatment. Get treatment.
Yeah.
So but he was an exceptional player. British Lion. You don't get to the British Lions level, but again, a player who loved playing but didn't love necessarily preparing to play. So he could have been even better.
That's the thing.
And you don't want to seem like you're giving these guys a hard time, but it was almost fun at the time, just a challenge to get them to do something. Yeah. And that was where you as a coach had to be a bit more kind of lateral thinker in terms of getting your programming done, so that they don't just bugger off at 10 o'clock when they'd seen the physio.
Yeah.
But the other one at the back end of his career, and he ran like a absolute exocet, Freddie Tuilagi. Yeah. So we've already mentioned Henry, who's a complete freak, but Freddie came from rugby league. He played at Leicester Tigers. Another one that came to Cardiff at the back end of his career. He just didn't have the appetite to train. At that point in time, he had played at a high level, lot of games, very abrasive type player, running straight and hard, taking a load of collision. You can almost, looking back and reflecting, I do say he was a lazy bastard, but on the field, absolute warrior, absolute competitor, absolute like animal going forward, wanted to smash through people, run over people. But you can tell when you look back, you think that takes its toll. And maybe you don't want to do anything in the week because you want to save that a level of exposure to the weekend. And I remember players at Tigers, just to finish off, they'd pretty much do nothing till Thursday, but they had rugby playing ability that allowed them a little bit, once they've got, England level players who had a bit of flexibility with their programming. And you can't literally train everybody the same all of the time. A 20-year-old, a 30-year-old, a 35-year-old have to be treated differently. But it's just about how you manage that and how you manage expectations around, a bit like the Andy Powell situation with the lineouts. It's like swapping in and out. Well, yes, you've got to save guys' legs these days. You've got to, But ultimately, it's those kind of challenges are never going to go away, especially in the collision sport.
Yeah.
But mate, we could talk.
No, that's a good one. That's a good episode.
Couldn't we?
I love that.
Oh, mate, you imagine telling them about some more stories. But that's a good bunch of players. But I think the underlying mechanism or the underlying messaging from our point of view, traits, habits, diligence, work ethic, longevity in the game, and success. I think those are the key things to take away from this.
Like you say, do the work.
Do the work.
Do the work.